Here's the thing though. Hello, and welcome to another episode of my podcast, Here's the Thing Though. My name is Soaliha, and I am your host. I'm here with the lovely Mitch Price, who is my producer / editor.
Hello.
Before we begin, we'd like to acknowledge the Darug and Ku-ring-gai people who are the traditional owners of the land that we are recording on today. We'd like to pay our respects to all First Nations people past, present and future. We're recording on stolen land and sovereignty was never ceded. Okay, so Mitch, how have you been this week?
Been pretty good. How have you been?
I've been good. Busy, tired, but good.
Busy. It has been a busy week.
What have you been up to? I'm gonna pretend that I haven't spent the last week with you. So what have you been up to, Mitch?
Just been trying to read, watching some movies, dealing with the podcast release and learning all that stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Fake it till you make it as producer, I guess.
We're definitely starting as like absolute novice babies, but we're figuring it out. It's all good. Speaking of our new podcast, I've made a podcast group for us. That's what I've spent the last few days doing, is like Facebook modding. Lol. I know we all have some unsavory feelings towards Facebook groups. I am definitely the first person to say how much I freaking hate like Facebook groups. However, I'm hoping this one will be a little different because, for one, I'm like vetting people who apply very, very intensely. There are a bunch of good questions that you have to answer. If I think the answer is inadequate, I'm literally just like declining memberships. I'm trying to make it as safe of a space as possible for women of color, who this group is predominantly for. Like, obviously it's for everybody, but it's, for me, like, the priority is having a safe space for women of color, because that is something I've pretty much lacked my entire, Facebook life. If you guys want to join the Facebook group, I'll put a link to it in my bio on Instagram. We'll put a link to it in the Spotify description as well. Cool. Anyway, let's talk about what we're going to get into today.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Today, we're going to talk about diversity, tokenism, and being woke by proximity. We're going to talk about that in relation to a few things that have happened lately in pop culture and media. But mostly we're just really going to get into like token diversity and representation and like how much we actually give a shit about those things. So I'm going to contextualize this a little bit with the recent GQ interview with John Boyega, where he basically talked about his time with Disney on Star Wars. And he pretty much criticized Disney for just like treating him like a token black star, and how they kind of just gave him a really shitty role, didn't give him the narrative development that he expected, and basically catfished all of us by making it seem like he was going to be a far bigger character than he actually was in this series. I really found that interview of his amazing. I think he's one of the few people to come out and really criticize Disney, because Disney is, ginormous. They own like everything. It's pretty terrifying actually in this horrible capitalist world how much Disney owns. I'm just gonna read you guys some, I think, of the key quotes from his interview that have made headlines lately. There's been a lot of articles about it. I wrote an article about it, plugging myself. If you go in the link in my bio and look at my 5-word articles, it'll be there. I think it's pretty good, so you guys should read it. But anyway, here are some quotes of his that I think are really interesting. I'm the only cast member who had their own unique experience of that franchise based on their race. Let's just leave it like that. It makes you angry with a process like that. It makes you much more militant. It changes you. Because you realize I got given this opportunity, but I'm in an industry that wasn't even ready for me. Nobody else in the cast had people saying they were going to boycott the movie because they were in it. Nobody else had the uproar and death threats sent to their Instagram DMs and social media saying black this and black that, and you shouldn't be a stormtrooper. Nobody else had that experience, but yet people are surprised that I'm this way. That's my frustration. I find it really interesting that John Boyega has been able to publicly speak about his frustration at being the token, like, person of color in a movie. I feel like we are so often made to feel like we are lucky to be part of these roles, that we are lucky to even be considered to be a part of these roles, that I actually think it's really revolutionary for him to not be sitting there going and frothing over the fact that he was able to be in this Star Wars film. Like, he does acknowledge in the interview that he is lucky to have this opportunity, but that doesn't stop him from criticizing how it was handled, which I just think we need so much more of, because I definitely feel that sometimes I can't criticize people that have given me opportunities because, oh, well, they've helped me, so who am I to come in here and criticize them for being racist? Like, I often feel gaslit by a lot of the media community and, you know, tone police and stuff about this thing. So I think I really want to get into John Boyega's, I guess, experience and how we're reacting to it, because he's been getting like a lot of hate for this interview. Like, people have been telling him, you know, oh my God, look at the audacity that this black man has to criticize Disney after they gave him such a huge film and made his career and blah, 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 blah. But what I find most interesting about this is the fact that, yeah, he suffered. Like, he suffered in his role as being the only black man in this very, very, very famous, you know, franchise. It's Star Wars. Like, it's Star Wars. This isn't a niche thing. This is something that everybody has either seen or, like, knows somebody who has watched it. Everybody knows Star Wars. And what I want to kind of get into is how much people aren't focusing on the suffering that John Boyega experienced while being the black man in this movie, and how much that seems to be, like, irrelevant to the narrative of telling him that he's lucky. Because is he really lucky? Is he really lucky if the cost of him being in Star Wars was endless trolling and hate and boycotts and feeling dehumanized and really having to feel the brunt of racism in this white supremacist world without any protection from Disney? And I think we'll talk a little bit more about Disney's role in this in a second. But I want to discuss the expectation of people of color to suffer in their diversity roles, and that to be seen as like a sign of progress, that like there are martyrs for diversity and that we're willing to throw people of color under the bus as the first to do something because it's progress, it's representation. Like, what is the cost of representation? I guess that's what we're going to kind of get into today. What is the cost of representation? Let's localize this a little bit. Obviously, I have talked endlessly about The Bachelor. I'm sure you're all pretty sick of it now. I mean, I'm pretty sick of it too. But it's relevant here because of Ariba, who was the contestant that had to deal with some pretty disgusting racism on the show. But also, she was the only kind of very visibly non-white person on the show. She was the only very dark-skinned person, and she was on there for a lot longer than the other dark-skinned people who were booted pretty quickly off the show. I loved seeing Ariba on the screen initially. She is Pakistani Australian. I am Pakistani Australian. It is the first time I've ever seen somebody like me, or of my, I should say, ethnic heritage, on TV, literally ever. I have never seen Pakistani representation on TV. I don't even know that many Pakistani people in real life, to be honest. It meant a lot to me to see her on TV and to see her as somebody, I guess, desirable. But she wasn't marketed as likable, and she certainly wasn't marketed as another contestant. She was immediately otherized. She was immediately villainized. Then she had to endure racial abuse on TV, which was obviously not fun for me as a Pakistani person to watch. And then we kind of all just like glossed over it and forgot about it. And if we weren't ignoring her racism, we were praising her for being, you know, the brown woman on this TV series. Ariba herself says on her Instagram that she's like so grateful for this opportunity, that she's so glad that she's able to represent her people, etc., etc. But I'm just like, is that worth it? Was it worth it for me to see Ariba on TV, but then also to see her abused? Was it worth it for me to have a Pakistani Australian woman on TV, but then also know that she was trolled? I was on her Instagram page and she was getting like hate from racist people, and the way she was villainized and vilified. I just think, like, was this good representation? Did this mean anything to me? And it makes me wonder, like, how progressive is it to have a person of color in a franchise if the actual franchise doesn't really acknowledge, like, the context of their race and how that's going to treat them outside of the set? Because with Ariba, again, nobody really acknowledged the fact that it was a pretty big deal that she was, like, one of the only non-white women on this show, while marketing otherized her and made her, like, an exciting thing for us all to watch. Like, she was definitely the one getting the most promo shots because, look, we have a brown woman, guys, please watch this show. Although, like, it was just pandering to a lot of us, like, people of color or lefties that kind of don't really watch the show because of how whitewashed it is. But, like, I didn't actually acknowledge the societal place that she had in there. It didn't acknowledge the white supremacy in that show. It didn't acknowledge the fact that she was constantly looked down upon, tone policed, villainized. It didn't actually deconstruct any of that. There wasn't actually a self-awareness to her place in the show. And so I'm starting to wonder if it actually meant anything and if it was worth it. And it's just like, how much are we willing to sacrifice for good representation? Does it mean this much to us? Is it this important? Because while on one hand, I completely understand the importance of representation for kids to just, not hate themselves. Like, growing up, being a dark-skinned person, watching Australian TV, you're always feeling inadequate and unattractive and like you don't fit into society. I can remember very explicitly every single cartoon I watched that had a dark-skinned woman in it because I latched onto those as a kid. It was like the only time I got to see myself even vaguely represented. And even then, they were never like Desi women. They were never Indian or Pakistani or Southeast Asian. They were usually black women, but it was as close as I got to a non-white figure to look up to, and I was on that. But now I'm just like older and I guess wiser and with far more nuanced politics, and I'm like, is this politics? Like, is having a brown woman on The Bachelorette actually progressive politics? Like, let's talk about the upcoming Bachelorette and the fact that Ellie Miles and her sister were cast as the two female Bachelorettes. They're both white, blonde women. And the outrage I felt at that. I wrote an Instagram post about it because I was just so shocked at like the fact that they would still do that after for so long people have been asking for a non-white Bachelorette. I felt outraged, I felt upset. And like I was gunning hard for a woman of color to be the Bachelorette. Like I was invested. But now I'm thinking about it and I'm just like, do I want a brown Bachelorette? Because after seeing the abuse that Ariba endured, after hearing about the way John Boyega has to deal with hate and trolls for his role, like, do I want to throw a woman of color under the bus for the sake of my own need for representation? Am I willing to sacrifice her and her mental health for the sake of representation for the next generation? Is she even going to change the political sphere by existing in this space? Like, I just don't know if that means anything. And it makes me wonder, because if these spaces are inherently unsafe for women of color, and they are, like we've seen it pretty clearly, that the sets that then go and get people of color on their show as token diversity applicants, they don't make the set safe for them. They don't make sure that there's no racism around. They don't even protect them from outright racism that's happening on screen. And in the case of The Bachelor, they use it for entertainment and laugh at it. It's pretty disgusting. We're obviously going to be stepped on and treated badly and expected to take it. And I don't really wish that upon anyone. And I don't really expect any brown women to do that for me. And I certainly don't want them to. And so it just kind of makes me wonder, like, is this where politics is at? I feel really conflicted because on the one hand, I want representation. I want to normalize seeing people like myself on screen. And I'm sick of white supremacy. I'm sick of this idealized white image that we get on TV all the time. But on the other hand, like, by gunning for a brown Bachelorette, by begging for representation from these like ginormous corporations that don't give a shit about us, are we just expending energy into something that doesn't actually change or dismantle the white supremacist society that we live in? Like, if Disney is a huge capitalist organization that owns half the world and will never be conducive to our interests, are we wasting our time putting energy into getting a person of color into its hostile clutches? I do wonder if I'm like getting lost in liberal feminism by wanting a brown Batchie. Isn't that just dangerous and irresponsible on my part, wanting to throw a woman of colour into this like vicious Australian media sphere? Who's going to protect her? Why am I okay for her to be used as collateral damage? Just like for like just media, for TV. Like, does it matter? Does it make a difference? Is it worth this sacrifice?
Like, yeah, I don't know. Is it even possible for shows like The Bachelor to do anything that isn't reinforcing the status quo? Like, its very premise centers on heteronormative relationships. Its cast is majority white, middle class, and have conventionally attractive bodies. And it just sort of reinforces that the realm of traditional romance is exclusive for these types of identities. And most problematically, I'm not sure if this type of diversity is going to really change anything. I'm not sure if this is where politics exist, because this is where quota checking diversity spawned by market research and audience demands doesn't do anything but harm the contestants or actors involved. It doesn't platform other identities, but instead highlights them as different, you know? Like, it highlights these people as exceptions to the norm because these norms are defined by white, heteronormative, middle-class spaces. In a way, it reinforces whiteness by showing difference and drawing attention to these people's, you know, their otherness and their identities. It's just sort of paradoxical nature of representation. The fact that representation can reinforce and highlight whiteness in a very complicated and difficult way.
Yeah, exactly. If anything, the representation and diversity exists to further alienate us and just to show us how much we don't fit into the white supremacy narrative. Like, especially with people like Ariba, for example, in The Bachelorette. Like, she was put in there as different to all these like these other white girls were just kind of like innocent and like, you know, a bit lovey-dovey and cute and like a bit bubbly. And then Ariba was like the dragon lady. Like, she existed there as the other, as different, as more aggressive and angry and less lovable and less likable, and not what we want in romance. Like, Ariba was put in there to be the opposite of ideal.
Exactly. It's not an expansion of voices, it's a disruption.
Look, when it comes to representation, I think you're right. It doesn't mean anything if the representation we do get on screen just reinforces, like, the white supremacist narrative that we're getting anyway. But I don't know, even then I'm on the fence because it's just like, I want it though. And I know everybody else wants it though. And I just like want to feel normal and I want to be accepted. But I think like when it comes to feeling accepted by these companies, like here's the thing though. These companies don't give a shit about you and your diversity. They actively have a hand in maintaining like the current power structures that deny you entry into these places in the first place. And when we do get in, they make sure that we're palatable to a racist audience. They muzzle us to make sure that, you know, we're not too black, we're not too Asian. This is relevant to Netflix and its constant casting of biracial women as black women. It always has like a mixed race person play a black woman because of this proximity to whiteness, right? We're constantly palatable, we're constantly muzzled, we're not allowed to exist as our most intense form as a person of color. And it's just like, is it worth it then? Because like, look, let's talk about making people of color palatable. All right, let's talk about when we do get diversity. Is it really progressive if we're just made palatable to a white audience and if we're just written off? And I feel like I'm gonna bring this back to John Boyega and Kelly Tran, who was an Asian woman in Star Wars. We were very excited to have her on there as like her and John Boyega, I guess, were the two kind of like ethnic representations we were all gunning for. Like they were marketed to be this like really exciting thing. It was definitely made in the promos to seem like a significant part of Star Wars and it was supposed to be progressive, right? And yet you go and you actually watch Star Wars and both of them are just they just have the saddest, most like non-existent storyline. It's completely watered down. And the way they're treated as well is just shocking because John Boyega, literally there's promos of him holding, what are they called? A lightsaber.
Yeah, those things.
Those things. Look, I will be honest, I don't know that much about Star Wars. I've watched the movies, but like, not that much. I didn't grow up on them. I've just seen them. Anyway, tangential. Let's get back to it. Like, John Boyega is literally marketed as holding a lightsaber. He's supposed to be like force sensitive, you know. We're supposed to get like this really exciting thing of a black man wielding the force. We're supposed to get a hero, you know. And I think they start off with the new like trilogy as giving us that. Like initially he is a really compelling, interesting character. I saw somebody describe it really well when they were talking about it because like he starts off as a stormtrooper and it's like, it's almost like the camera was following somebody else and then gets distracted by him and then starts following him. It's really interesting. It feels a bit subversive. Like we zero in on a side character, a nobody. And we're so excited because we feel like nobodies. People of color watching these movies, we feel like nobodies and we're about to see another underdog like us make it. And then he doesn't. And then he isn't really force sensitive. We don't really see an expansion of his character. He has no character growth. And for the entire 3 movies, he pines after a white girl that's not into him. And then, like, the tiny little bit of romance he does actually get is from Kelly Tran's character, who is also completely butchered, exists for, like, 5 seconds, and then becomes a background character too. And the storyline she's given doesn't make sense. She's given a romantic arc with John Boyega, the only other person of color. Like, it's just so obviously pairing the two people of color together, because who else would love them, right? You know, we're not seen as romantic options by anybody else. And then it kind of just ends and we never talk about it. They don't even acknowledge that they like kissed in the next movie. It's just weird. Like, the whole thing is weird and like disjointed. And I know people are going to say, oh, but they were different directors, blah, 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 blah. It's, you know, that's why it's incohesive. And it's like, okay, but you can't ignore the fact that racial elements are also involved here. Like, it's not, there can be more than one issue. There can be more layers to this. Like, yes, part of the disjointed story is because behind the scenes, everything was just fucked and like nobody knew what they were doing. But also, as John Boyega points out later, other characters got development. Here's a quote from his article. He says, what I would say to Disney is, do not bring out a black character, market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side. It's not good. I'll say it straight up. Like, you guys knew what to do with Daisy Ridley. You knew what to do with Adam Driver. You knew what to do with these other people, but when it came to Kelly Marie Tran, when it came to John Boyega, you know, fuck all. So what do you want me to say? What they want you to say is, I enjoyed being a part of it. It was a great experience. Nah. I'll take that deal when it is a great experience. And that's exactly it, right? That's exactly it. He's supposed to feel grateful for being lied to, for being catfished into this role that he thought was going to be different. He's like written off. It's like absolutely shit, the storyline he gets. And then he's just like, he's going to say, oh, it was wonderful. It was great working on this thing. I'm so lucky as a black man to be afforded, you know, the basic decency of actually hiring me for my talent, not my skin tone. Of course he's not going to say that. That's not what happened. And that's why his interview is like so amazing. You know, because he goes out and he says it. And it's something that, like, I feel like a lot of people of color, especially people like me who work in the media particularly, that resonates with me as somebody who often feels muzzled. I often feel like I can't really say what I want to say without being branded as aggressive or ungrateful. You know, especially for me in particular, because I just get the go back to where you came from comments if I, like, even dare to criticize the state that I live in. And it's just like, this is it. I love that he's criticizing it, because that's what Disney did to him. Like, the only reason his role even existed was to just water down a black man's, you know, experience here because of Black Lives Matter and all that was happening. There was so much chaos in the last few years with cops shooting black people, and the black vote is becoming important. Black audienceship is becoming important. And of course, capitalists are going to capitalize off the fact that we want black representation, given the, you know, most recent movements around Black lives. And it's just so opportunistic. It's so predatory. It's not genuine. None of this is genuine. It is just a marketing ploy that this company has done. They've used John Boyega, knowing his role, knowing how he's going to resonate with black audiences who otherwise probably wouldn't watch a lot of these shitty movies. Like, they purposefully capitalized and preyed upon black people's needs for representation. And John Boyega is a G, because he actually just, like, called it out. I don't, I'm just gonna keep frothing over it because I just think it's great that he's
it's a really amazing interview. Yeah, it's so, you never see everything so sugar coated, right? Especially in the mainstream Disney realm. It's so sort of striking to see something so genuine, honest, and doesn't really give a fuck, right?
Yeah, like, he's not afraid anymore of losing his career, because I think he was initially a few months ago after George Floyd was murdered. He gave a very passionate speech at a Black Lives Matter rally. It was pretty amazing. It's like, it'll radicalize you. And in it, he's like, you know, I don't care if I'm gonna get, like, I don't care if I'm gonna lose my job. I don't care if I can't find work after this. Like, this is too important. And I think it's really incredible to watch, because it's in that moment that you realize how much people of color really have to lay on the line all the time just to, like, defend our right to live. You know, for John Boyega as a black man specifically, like, the fact that it was potentially damaging to his career to, like, say Black Lives Matter as a black man is ridiculous. The fact that, you know, fighting against your own subjugation and criticizing the powers that be that are responsible for the death of your people is somehow controversial is ridiculous, right? And it just keeps coming down to the fact that the only reason diversity exists in these spaces, like in Disney or in The Bachelor or whatever, like, the only reason we even get token diverse contestants or stars is, like, for tokenism. It's meaningless. It's just these meaningless appearances and cameos that make the company look woke by proximity without them actually having to do anything, without them actually like having to dismantle the system that prevents us from having these opportunities in the first place, right? And like I'm saying work by proximity again. I know I talked about it a little bit last week, but it's going to come up a lot when we talk because it's so true and it's a real experience that I have all the time. Like, I mean, even with John Boyega, like look at his experience as a vocal black man and look at Disney co-opting that, using him and then discarding him for the racists to eat alive. They just want to look woke by being associated with him. But do you think Disney gives a fuck about black lives? Do you think Disney cares that these things are happening? Of course not. Like, Disney cares about profits. Disney is a ginormous corporation. It's not a person. We're not humanizing it. It's within their interests. I mean, there's so much about that. Like, let's talk about like Hamilton as a play. If you guys don't know about Hamilton, it is... Mitch is looking at me like I'm crazy because I'm just randomly going to this tangent, but I swear it's relevant. You're going to think I'm so conspiratorial, Mitch.
Oh, no.
He knows. We had this conversation before and he disagreed with me. But Hamilton was released on Disney+. Before I get that, I should just say what Hamilton is. Hamilton is a play. It's like revisionist history that kind of subverts like the founding fathers and like blackwashes it. And it's a pretty incredible play. It's very like nationalistic, which I don't support, and it glosses over slavery. But as a play, it's pretty incredible. It's very witty. It's very smart. Very clever. It's very well loved as well. And Disney released it like at the height of like Black Lives Matter. And I think it was really opportunistic and predatory because they actually had the rights to it for years. And they waited until like the height of Black Lives Matter protests and the height of like discontent among Black Americans to release this like nationalistic pro-Black play. And to me, that just says everything. Like, to me, that's not a coincidence. I know exactly what they were doing. They were capitalizing off the anger of Black people. How crazy is that? And they were pandering to them, and they were like, oh, like, how best can we prey upon the fact that Black people are currently organizing and becoming radical? Let's feed them nationalist propaganda that also panders to their Black identity. Right?
No.
Do you agree with me, Mitch?
I agree. To be fair, when I did disagree with you, I hadn't seen it yet. And once I did watch it, as good as it is, it completely sugarcoats the traumatic history of just America, the absolute slave-ridden bloodbath this history contains. And I didn't realize how much of it is just sort of very legitimate liberal nonsense. There is almost something very problematic about having a Black person play a slave owner in the play. It just completely is revisionist and just disregards the struggle completely.
Yeah, and like, look, I say this as somebody who loves Hamilton. Like, I have seen it so many times. I know like all the songs by heart, but I'm also able to like look at it critically and understand where it falls short. It's not radical. It's subversive and Black nationalist, and it's amazing. And I imagine that is really great representation for Black Americans. I totally understand why it would hold a special place in their heart, and I respect that completely. But also, we can't ignore the fact that it romanticizes like the founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson, who was a slave owner, is played by Daveed Diggs, who is a Black man.
Amazing rapper, by the way. Just want to plug that.
Yeah, Mitch is a big fan of Daveed.
Very
Diggs.
big fan.
But like, let's just talk about the fact that Thomas Jefferson actually owned oh, what a horrible word, but owned a child slave who was Black, and he like took her to France with him when he went to France. And he goes to France like in the play, but it's just not talked about the fact that like he had a child slave who he took with him and impregnated like 7 times. She was like essentially his like constant rape victim.
So
and she
fucked
was,
up.
Yeah, it's like, how are we just like romanticizing these people, making them funny and likable? Like, I don't know. It's, you know, it's one of those things where it's like, it's, yeah, I guess it's liberal progressiveness where it like seems really progressive and it seems really woke because we're getting representation and we're validating like the Black identity, but also we're glossing over like actual slavery, which I think is very relevant here. And also it's just nationalistic. Like, why are we romanticizing the birth of America when it was birthed on the grounds of like the American economy started with slaves, like capitalism started with the slave trade, you know, like all of these things are linked. And I know we've fallen down the like Hamilton rabbit hole, but the reason I started talking about that was the fact that Disney doesn't think Hamilton is work. That's not why Disney has Hamilton. Like, Disney didn't buy the rights of Hamilton because they love its message. Disney bought the rights of Hamilton because it understood that this was a way to get to the Black audience and to calm them down, you know, to seem more likable to them so that they don't like revolt against you. It was released at a very tumultuous time. And that is on purpose. None of these things are accidents. And to make it, to sound even more conspiratorial, except it's not conspiratorial, John Boyega, when his interview came out, like literally the moment it came out, Disney dropped the new Mandalorian trailer. And that was not scheduled to come out that day. Like nobody knew the trailer was going to come out that day. And it dropped like the moment his interview started to gain traction and go public, because they were obviously going to spam the Star Wars hashtag.
To sedate the audience.
Man, it's censorship. It's like, it's so calculated, and it's wrong to think it's not calculated. Because Disney, as a ginormous corporation, they know what they're doing. There's a reason that they're so big. There's a reason they're this successful. There's a reason they own literally everything. It's because they know how to maintain their place in, like, this food chain. Like, it's pretty crazy that they dropped Mandalorian the moment John Boyega criticized them. Because that's what this, like, I was writing an article at the time, like, when it came out, and immediately the hashtags, when I was searching for, like, tweets and things, was flooded with Mandalorian content. And it was so strange, and it was so obvious. Like, to me, it was very obvious. I mean, the reason we're talking about it is just, like, the fact that you need to be critical of, like, diversity and diversity points, because it doesn't mean anything. Like, these companies are just being worked by proximity. They're just using diverse contestants in order to look good. Are we just aiding them? Are we just aiding the system? Are we just aiding white supremacy by, like, partaking in these systems? That's the question, right? Speaking of work by proximity, I know we're talking a lot about, I guess, tokenism in terms of, like, TV and, like, being, and, like, in TV shows and, like, real famous celebrities. But let's talk about tokenism on a personal level, too. I feel like that happens to me a lot as a vocal hijab-wearing Muslim brown woman in the Australian media landscape, where there aren't that many of us. And as somebody who perhaps has kind of, like, my profile and I guess where I stand in the media has blown up a lot in the last year. Like, I only graduated a few months ago, but I'm already working and I've already gotten quite a few gigs and I'm pretty well known in certain spheres because of things that happened to me and it all blew up and stuff. But it also means I'm now starting to get tokenized, and it's definitely a really strange experience. It's actually, like, not that different to, like, being fetishized in a relationship, but it's like a friend/work version. You know, I started noticing influencers or, like, personalities take an interest in me and chat to me and be like, oh my god, such a huge fan, love your writing, and then, like, never speak to me again and also do something racist later. And it's like, you made sure the world knew that you and I were talking, and then you stopped talking to me and you started doing racist shit. Like, it just felt like an image thing. It just felt like to be associated with me was relevant to maintaining their identity as somebody progressive. And then nobody can criticize them for not being progressive because, oh, but look at their brown hijabi friend, Soaliha, you know? An influencer recently criticized critical thinkers as being too angry and defensive, and they said that they're too extreme, reactive, and aggressive in responding to things. Which, you know, I just found shocking because this is somebody that I know and, like, have somewhat of a relationship with. But it was just like, this is tone policing. This is tone policing. You are tone policing people for being angry about, like, the state and, like, racism and just, like, you know, the shit that we have to deal with every single day. And this is what I mean with, like, liberal feminism and being worked by proximity, where it's just, like, these movements that mean nothing because they don't actually seek to dismantle anything. They don't actually seek to genuinely uplift the oppressed. It's just about imagery. It's just about symbols of progression. For being, like, with that person and being worked by proximity, it's like, oh, I'm going to be friends with this really worked person and make sure that every now and then I mention them. But also, I'm going to now go and do really problematic shit and say really problematic shit and really dismissive shit about things that person cares about. But I can get away with it because look at all these, like, brown friends I have. You know? It's just, I feel like it's becoming really pervasive in society. Like, just, like, using the image of people of color to be woke. And we don't really have a say in this, do we? Because, like, can I fight that? Can I fight that as somebody who has a small following and who is immediately going to be branded as, like, the angry woman of color? Like, if I call out white people for using me for wokeness, I'm just ruining another white friendship with politics. I'm just another angry brown girl who doesn't know when to stop. And how do I balance my work life and my friendships like that? Because I don't want to be demonized, but I also don't want to be tokenized. And I don't really get to choose between them. Like, do I risk getting called out like that, but, like, standing up for myself and standing up for what's right? Or no? Where is the limit in how much anger I'm allowed to show towards a state before I'm no longer palatable to people that use me for wokeness? Now I'm angry and reactionary. Like, why do white people even get to choose that limit? Is it because at the end of the day they benefit? So, like, me criticizing the state is all well and good while it makes them look good until it actually challenges their own status in society, and now it's problematic. This kind of tokenism is just so pervasive in like every element of my life and in every element of society, and it is for like every person of color, from like the TV that you watch to the workplaces that you're in, to the friendships that you have, to the people you date. We're constantly being tokenized and used for like woke image purposes all the time. Like this wokeness by proximity, again, shout out to Lauren for coining the term. That I didn't make it up. This is Lauren's term. But this whole like work by proximity and like diversity token, they're so linked. They come hand in hand, because with tokenism comes a desire to look work by proximity. Like that is why we have tokenism diversity. The whole reason we have token diversity is to look like we are fighting racism or, you know, standing up for people of color without actually doing anything meaningful, or without actually dismantling the system that hurts them and oppresses them, without actually making our spaces less hostile for them. We don't change, with tokenism diversity, we don't change anything except the fact that we just throw in a POC into the room and then, you know, use them and then let them fend for themselves.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like throughout the podcast, we've maybe spoken with some apprehension, because a lot of the time this can sound a lot like a conservative argument when we're sort of trying to criticize diversity or representation. From the right perspective, from a far right perspective, is that, you know, this stuff is disingenuous and is merely to appeal to snowflakes, and actually we like that these spaces are exclusive and are predominantly white, certain types of identities, certain types of sexuality, and we want to keep these spaces like this. However, when we come from a far left perspective, where we're saying actually this representation isn't enough, this isn't satisfactory, this is the product of a capitalist system that is trying to pander to sort of uncritical liberal nonsense, right?
Yeah, and I do want to put a disclaimer here that, like, we're not criticizing people who go on reality TV, and we're definitely not criticizing you for watching reality TV or enjoying it, and you're absolutely entitled to enjoy any kind of, you know, diversity that you want to. Like, I know that I really, really value seeing a person that looks like me on TV. Like, I binged Degrassi High. I binged it when I found out that there's a hijabi girl in it, like, literally for that reason and only that reason. Although I will say, Degrassi High does a Muslim hijabi character really well, and you guys should watch it. I was actually hooked. But that's beside the point. The point is, you're not like a bad feminist or like a racist for wanting to enjoy that content and wanting to engage with it, and for wanting a woman of color as a bachelorette. There's nothing wrong with wanting that, and there's nothing even wrong with fighting that. But the issue here is, like, don't expend all your energy there. Don't let that be the hill that you die on, because while that's gonna make you feel better and it's going to be better for our self-esteem, it's not actually going to dismantle racism, and it's not actually going to change the system. So just like know what you're going to let exhaust you. I feel like I am pro having people of color on sets and stuff with some critical apprehension, but I'm mostly pro it if it can be done well. But also, I'm not going to die fighting on this hill, because I know at the end of the day, this isn't what's going to liberate us. This isn't actually where politics are at.
Well, the truth of it is that it's actually profitable for companies to be diverse, to appeal to a large, multifaceted audience, because it's more, you know, seats in cinemas, it's more people paying for TV shows, music, etc. So the thing is, just because there is representation doesn't mean that these corporations are our friends, that this is entirely positive. And it's important to be critical, because often they do pander. Often the actors that play these diverse roles are the sacrifices of representation. They are just left to fend for themselves. The production has used them, exploited them, and left them to deal with the consequences of the racist mass of people that is going to send them death threats, going to criticize their roles, and act like they had any real impact on the way that they were represented.
Yeah, because like that's the thing that we need to remember is, like, every time we get to see a person of color on TV, we get to see them on TV at the sacrifice of like their own bubble. Like, that person who is now on TV definitely gets death threats. They definitely get racist hate mail. They definitely are dehumanized on a level that most of us don't understand because we're not in the public eye. And we just need to be, I think, just critical. Like, the point of this podcast episode is not to tell you that representation is bad or that you can't like it or that we don't want it. The point is to be critical of it every time you get it, even when you're excited about it. Like, even when we're excited to get John Boyega, because I was very excited to have him in Star Wars. Even though I'm excited about it and I love the fact that he was in it, I can still be critical of how he was used and how he was exploited and how he was represented and what that means for me and how much I'm willing to sacrifice. Like, and particularly for any white listeners here who obviously don't have the same issues with representation that people of color have. I know a lot of you are probably really pro having a woman of color as the Bachelor, and while I'm really glad that you want to see us on TV, maybe also be critical of, like, do you think about the consequences on the woman of color who is going to be the Bachelorette or on the Bachelor? Like, when you're gunning to have a First Nations woman as the Bachelorette, does it occur to you that you're also going to be subjecting her to a lot of abuse by putting her in that situation? Like, do you think about that? I'm not saying let that stop you, but I'm saying think about it and think about ways we're going to protect these people. Because I will be fine and happy with representation the day that we have a system that is able to protect them from the racist onslaught that comes with being a person of color on TV. Like, this is for the white followers. Like, if you guys want a woman of color as a Bachelorette like we do something to protect us from criticism. Because maybe that's why so many of us don't apply. I know I certainly would never apply to be on literally any reality TV show because I know the abuse that I'm going to get for that. And it's just not worth it.
Sweet. Thanks for listening. I feel like this is a great time to talk about our sponsors for the episode, which is you, our listeners. We're still figuring things out and we're not really sure how to proceed with monetization yet. And ideally, we'd like to avoid being slaves to the capitalist machine.
So, if you thought our discussion today was interesting, thought-provoking, and something you learned from, please consider donating to our PayPal link, paypal.me/Soaliha, to support future episodes. The PayPal link is in my Instagram bio, so check it out over there at Soaliha Official, and give me a follow if you liked today's episode. Also, if you have any comments or suggestions or want to add to the discussion, you can email us at here'sathingthoughpodcast@gmail.com, and please include your name, pronouns, and any other important info. We'll also be discussing all this stuff in our Facebook group, Here's a Thing Though Podcast. It's also in my Instagram bio, so you can find it over there. And of course, remember to follow and subscribe. It really helps the podcast get out there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.